Hi everybody, this is Devin Dombrowski, and in this video tutorial we're going to be discussing how to update a record for the first 24 hours. And what we mean by the first 24 hours is the first 24 hours of that animal under your care, which is really a very critical time period. So if you've been following along, in the previous video we admitted 4 dark-eyed juncos brought in by Jim Smith. So we're back on one of those dark-eyed juncos, number 10. And right now we're on the initial care screen, which is the screen that we're going to stay pretty much on during this video. But I'll briefly show you that if I go to the Rescuer tab, I can see Jim Smith, and here's his contact information. And if I scroll down, well, this Jim Smith has brought in many animals, 10 animals so far. But you can see right on the bottom, these 4 dark-eyed juncos are the 4 that he's recently brought in. So if I go back to initial care, this is where we're going to spend our time on. And basically, we want to make sure we update as much of this information as possible. The first bit of information here is the intake information, which has already been filled out because it was collected when the animals were admitted. But if I needed to make any changes, I can of course do that here. The next area is identity, which is basically further ways to uniquely identify this junco. So if I put a band on the junco while I was examining him, I could write that in here. So maybe it was 1, 2, 3, yellow. Or any kind of tag or band or any kind of uniquely identifying mark that has been applied to that animal. So maybe it was an ear tag or a band or any kind of uniquely identifying mark that we've given to this animal can be put in there. If you're at a center where your patients are named, you could write that patient's name in here. Keywords are words or terms that are made up by you and your center that help you to identify this record amongst all the hundreds or thousands of records you might get in. So for example, if you all at your center decide to use the keyword cat, or caught by cat, or CBC, or whatever have you, you can use that term and put it on every single record that was caught by cat. And at the end of the year, or maybe years later, you could search all of your records under the keywords field for CBC, and all of those caught by cat records would come up. But really, keywords are up to you. So whatever you decide is a good keyword should be written in here. Nature of injury is a very important field because it will help to really identify why this animal was brought in. The observations are what the rescuer observed and what he thinks was wrong with the animal, but nature of injury is the bottom line problem that this animal is experiencing. It's also the information that will go on the U.S. Federal Annual Report, and as well as many other state and provincial annual reports. Now down at the bottom is really the meat of this page, which is the initial exam and treatment. And you can see on here, it's on the top, there are drop-down lists with the animal's dehydration is, or what its sex or mentation, mucous membrane color, the admit weight. So let's just say that this guy was 30 grams. The admit age, and there are 2 fields here because if this was a mammal or an animal, where I could specifically say that he was 1 month old, or maybe 1 day, I can do that. But the number field is not actually required. It's the drop-down list that you need to identify. So let's just say that this dark-eyed junco is immature. Body condition score, so how thin or plump is he? Let's just say he's in a reasonable condition. And if we took temperature on him, we could write that in here as well. Now all these fields down here at the bottom are basically areas for you to describe your exam findings on this dark-eyed junco. So we said earlier that this junco fell from a nest, so let's just unfortunately presume that he has some head trauma. So we could just write in head swelling, and I'll leave it simple. But you could of course write in sentences or many paragraphs of text, and it would appear that this field here is narrow. But the truth is, if you continue to type more things, it'll allow you to put in as much content as you want. And I don't want any of this there. So eyes and ears, not very descriptive, but I wanted to put something in there. wings, arms, hands, legs, feet, and so on. So as I did my initial findings on this, I could write in whatever I found. And of course, if I didn't find anything, I could write in NVI, or no visible injuries, or I could just leave it blank. And then the field down here on the bottom, initial treatment, is where I could type in any initial treatment that I've given to this dark-eyed junco. So maybe straight away I gave him some fluids, because let's say that when he came in he was severely dehydrated, and any other initial treatment. So besides the fluids, maybe he was put on heat, although putting a head-swelling, head trauma animal on heat may not always be the best idea. And the last field in here is the examiner, which in this case is my name. And this is basically to give credibility to whoever did this initial exam. And it's really up to you. You could put in your name, you could put in your initials, you can do whatever you want to do to describe, who you are, of course. And then lastly, down at the bottom is disposition related information. So of course, the first area would be what the animal's disposition is. And by default, it's pending, but we can, of course, update it if we needed it to. I'm going to leave it as pending because I'm going to hope that this junco continues on in care. But if miraculously he recovered right away and I wanted to just came out and release him, I could put release for the disposition. If the animal was transferred, I can do that. And then I would want to specify the transfer type. If he came in dead on arrival, I can do that. Died or euthanized. And you can see that for both died and euthanized, there's died in 24 hours or died beyond 24 hours, as well for euthanized. And the reason that is because it's really unique and powerful to know of all the animals that died or were euthanized in the first 24 hours, how well did they do in their care. And I will mention that on the U.S. Federal Annual Report, died and euthanized are combined. So the two dieds will be combined into one number, as well as on many of the state and provincial reports. If the animal was died or euthanized or even released, I could specify the disposition date and its location. On the right, I can specify the enclosure that the animal has been placed in, so I'll just put him in bird cage 1. The enclosure history field can be very useful. It won't be at this very moment, but as I move the animal from one enclosure to the next, I could keep a history in here of where that animal has been. That way, in the future, if there's ever an outbreak of a disease or there's a problem within a certain enclosure, I can go back and identify what birds or what animals were in that enclosure and when they were in there. Holding at is just a way for you to identify where the animal is holding. So it could be at your clinic, it could be at some off-site location, or you could have sent it to home care with one of your volunteers or staff. Criminal activity is really important for the U.S. Federal Annual Report. If this junco had criminal activity associated with it, I could just check the box, and now this junco will show up on this section for criminal activity. But he didn't. And carcass saved, of course, if the animal was died or euthanized and the carcass was saved, I could designate that as well. So really, it's not too difficult on this page to make updates and edits. Now there's a few other things that have happened here that I want to mention, but before I get on to that, let me update the record so I can show you in real time. If I go down to the name, and let's give this junco a name, Fred. One thing that you'll notice up here in the top right is I've made a change to the record. So Wildlife Rehabilitation MD is going to start auto-saving the changes that I've made. And the truth is, the auto-save actually happens so fast that sometimes you don't really see the message that shows up here on the top right. But one thing we are seeing here, all changes saved. So it's telling me that all of the changes have already been saved. So if I were to make this change to this record and then forget to press the update record button and walk away, that isn't the worst thing in the world because the database is saving the record for me. But just for that sense of making sure I really do it, I am going to click the update record button. And another thing I wanted to point out to you, on this page there is very, very few required fields. The intake information is required, and it's already been filled out from creating this record. The admit, weight, and age are required, and the disposition is required as well. If for some reason you don't have access to the required information, or you just can't get that information in time, and instead, let's just suppose we don't have the animal's weight, you're going to notice that we can't actually update this record because there's required information that's missing. Well, there is a way to temporarily get around that, and that's by clicking this temporarily remove validation link. And so if I check that box, what it does is makes none of the fields on the screen required. And now I can click the update record link. So I've saved the information on there, but as soon as the page refreshes, you'll see that everything is required again. So the temporary is temporary for that very moment. And that's really to help encourage you to collect this absolute most simple and basic information. So let's put the weight back in here. And now all that information all the required information has been collected. And really that's all there is to updating the record on the first 24 hours of care. Now, are you obligated to put your information into the database? No, you're not. It's an ideal situation that you would keep all of your information electronic. That way it's archived and searchable for the future. But we are realistic, and we know that sometimes doing things on the database for a brand new center using a database can be difficult. So there is an alternate option that you can do. And what that is using one of our extensions, which is called paper records. And if I had the paper records extension activated, which I'll just go ahead and do right now to show you real briefly. Paper forms, excuse me. And I'll go back to initial care. And what that has done is added these links on the top. So instead of filling out all the information on the screen, I could, of course, from the very beginning, if that extension was activated, clicked on the intake form link here, which creates a PDF that has basically every single field that is on the actual database, but is now in this PDF form, which I can take this PDF and print it out. Now, in this case, I've gone ahead and already filled in a lot of this information, like the animal's weight and its age and band and so forth. And since I'm printing the record out now, or producing the record now, that information has actually already been filled out on this page for me. But if I hadn't filled out any of the information on the database, these would be blank lines, and none of the information here would be listed in as well. So what some centers prefer to do as they're becoming more comfortable with the database is they like to create the record and then immediately come to the initial record screen, initial care screen, print out the intake form which will already have the case number and species and location and observations and so forth. And they'll fill in this information on paper. And then when the time is appropriate, they'll come back to the database, transcribe it into here, or at the very, very least, put the animal's final disposition in. So feel free to use that. Treatment log just provides a very simple and generic log where you can keep long-term history notes on the animal. And of course, if you wanted to produce a cage card that you could put on the animal's cage, you have that as well. So basically that's all there is to updating the record for the first 24 hours. Next, we're going to pretend that we're days and weeks ahead, and we're going to go on to the continued care where we can see the long-term history of the animal. Thanks for watching.